Please join me as we light our chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith,
with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for
truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And it is a pleasure to be here. I have to say that I used to live in Victor, and my husband Joe came out with me this morning to ride the path to Canandaigua once again. But last year we moved to the city, almost around the edge of the city of Rochester. And one of the things, after 20 years of not being very close to our neighbors at all, one of the things that we noticed is that our neighbors were right close next to us. And it was really easy to start making up stories about our neighbors. Now, you never have done this, right? Is this something you all have done? Well, it was interesting because we lived next door to a gentleman, and we didn't see much of him. And he had a big fence between our backyard and his backyard. And he had a pool which he never went in. And he had some indication that he might have children, but we never saw any. So in that opportunity, in the empty space, we started to make up stories. You know, maybe he was a loner. Maybe he was divorced and had kids that he never saw. But of course, none of this had any basis in reality whatsoever. And then something interesting happened this year. In the summertime, after, we didn't have a really snowy winter, but in the summertime, the fence that had separated our house from his house fell over. And all of a sudden there was this wide patch of space between our two backyards. And all of a sudden we got to know Adam. He was a nice guy. He was concerned about the space where the fence had been because our grandkids were over all the time and the pool was pretty attractive. Wanted to make sure we knew that he was going to have the fence repaired and his old dog would now sneak over into our yard. We talked about his dog and about how sad it was that he was going to have to lose his dog soon. So all of a sudden, Adam became real. The fence came down. We had a neighbor. We stopped making up stories, and we opened our hearts to someone that we hadn't really allowed ourselves to know before. And you see, that's why we come to church, right? Because here we have an opportunity to take down the fences, to really build the bridge between our yard and the person's yard who is next to us, and have the honest and open conversation so that we can learn to care about one another together. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to the next hour with you.
It's time to settle in now and express the spirit of meditation and prayer. Sit back in your chair and relax. Feel the solid ground holding you up. Breathe deeply and feel the collective breath of this beloved community. The season has turned. It is autumn now. The days grow shorter still, and the world is busy preparing for the darkness of winter. The birds flock and fly south. The squirrels chase one another and store food. The children are planning for Halloween. Families are busy, and we all become full of memories of times past and of the passing of time. At this time of year, it is easy to become melancholy, to think of how little time we have left before the winter sets into our souls. And then the Holy gives us a day like this, where there is a cool, sturdy breeze and a hint of youth in the air. A day to turn your face to the sun and allow its warmth to sink into your soul. A day to breathe deeply the fragrance of the fall air. And a day to remember that as the leaves are about to let go of the branch, they turn their most brilliant color. A day like this is a day to feel blessed. Let us be silent together. May the silence we share serve to hold us and heal us all. Amen. Several years ago, before I was a minister, I was a counselor, and I worked for a time at the Career Resource Center. We helped outplaced employees regain their footing and move into new stages of their life. It was back in the 1990s, and the first wave of the Kodak employees came to us who were being downsized, laid off, let go. You remember the euphemisms. It was a devastating experience to many of the people that I saw who had only known Kodak as their sole employer. Several of these individuals who, within weeks of graduating high school, had a steady, well-paying job at a good company with good benefits, and they thought they were set for life. I was touched at that time by so many stories. But there's one in particular I want to share with you today. It's about Sam. Sam was a manager. He had spent close to 20 years building a career in product marketing. He was proud of his efforts, and when we met, he told me about all the successful product launches and his travels around the globe for Kodak. He had traveling privileges at many of the major airlines, and he received red carpet treatment at Japan, at Germany, France, China. Sam also talked about being a good manager, about advocating for the development of his employees and promoting new ideas. He was important, he told me. He made a difference. Well, our sessions continued, and together we tried to craft a new resume and a new plan out of the rubble of his new situation. Sam began to gain some perspective and talk honestly about the toll his career took on his life. Over several weeks, the conversation shifted, and he began to see things from a different angle. He told me about the many sleepless nights when he worried about this project or that product. He recalled not coming home in time to have dinner with his family or even to kiss his children goodnight. He remembered missing sporting events and school concerts. He told me that one time his anxiety was so high because of the fast pace of his job and the increasing expectations that he had gone to the doctor to ask for medication, to sleep, to reduce his stress, and to give him the stamina to go back in every day. That should have been my wake-up call, he told me. I gave my life to that place. To be honest, I always felt as if I was out of sync. I never truly believed that I made any difference at all. I felt good about promoting a business that enhanced people's lives, but I increasingly worried about the pollution caused by the production and development of film. You see, I'd been a big advocate for environmental issues in high school and college, and then I let it all go for this job. I tried to make it work, he said. I had a family, and it was a good job, but my ideas were seldom endorsed. I was one voice in 1,000, and I don't really think my voice was ever heard. Eventually, he told me, I stopped trying to make a difference, and I just went along for the ride. I enjoyed the perks, and the money was good, and I realize now that I spent my life frosting a cardboard cake. And then came the question. I always asked this question, and I waited for what seemed like the right moment when I could get the most honest answer. Sam, if you could do anything you want, what would it be? A farmer, he said. Without hesitation and doubt, his face lit up. As I'd never seen it before, there was an unbridled enthusiasm as he talked about the farm that his grandfather owned. He talked about his desire to work the land and advocate for responsible and renewable farming practices. He told me that, skipped a page, sorry. He told me that he had an opportunity to still help his granddad on the farm when he had spare time. He was always reading about articles and research on organic farming. It was his secret passion. He thought the city children lacked good access to wholesome food and that it was his dream to find a way to change that. He talked about taking organic farming to the city, to use vacant lots to bring fresh produce to neighborhoods. It's going to be the next trend, he told me. And please remember, this was the late 1990s. And then I couldn't stop him. Before my eyes, he became an advocate for a loud internal voice in his heart, a voice that told him not to compromise his values, not to quiet his protest and go along for the ride because the money was good. He found the voice that gave power and purpose to his life. Well, I'm telling you this story because Sam also told me that there were many people in his life who discouraged him from farming. His father thought he could do better in a world, and even his grandfather had hoped he would choose an easier path. They called his ideas foolish and short-sighted. And if he wanted to be responsible and care for his family, he would study business and work for a good company. At some point in his life, Sam decided to believe a singular story about himself, one that told him that pushing forward on this path was his only responsible option. At some point, he chose to silence his authentic voice and view his life in a dimension that was one-directional. For a long time, Sam never spoke to anyone about his love and his deep passion for farming. During this month, with honesty as our theme, I've listened to many members of our Soul Matters groups talk about the dishonesty of omission. While many of us feel that we are truthful most of the time, we recognize the potential dishonesty when we choose not to speak at all, when we choose to carefully craft our words, when we choose to hold back our voice entirely. Now, I understand that there are so many reasons for this. We may decide that it's safer or that we need to keep our boundaries or our privacy. We may fear others' reactions or decide that our silence actually protects someone. Each situation calls for discernment and choice. Honesty is not, and never has been, simple. But I believe there's another reason that many of us do not speak, and that is that somewhere inside us, we believe that we have no voice, or believe that we perhaps have no right to a voice, that our voice has been so sculpted by our life's circumstances, and there is little left of it that's real. Several years ago now, there was a film called The King's Speech. Perhaps you remember it. King George VI of England was suddenly shoved into the spotlight when his brother Edward abdicated from the throne. George was faced with public speaking, and his debilitating stutter was paralyzing. Well, as the movie goes on, we realize that as a child, King George was shamed and ridiculed by his father. He heard a message over and over again that he was less capable and less worthy. And as he internalizes this message, his voice becomes tragically impaired. You see, I suspect that to some degree many of us have also heard and internalized some of the same kinds of messages. Perhaps it's something like this. Who are you to speak? What makes you think you have anything worthwhile to say, or your opinion can't change things? Or maybe the message encouraged you to keep a low profile, dim your light, or perhaps not be bold or visible at all, because to do so would be vain and self-promoting. At this point, you see, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We believe the messages, and so we act accordingly. Self-doubt becomes our dominant speech in our heart, and we quiet our authentic voice. I think there's one more part to the puzzle, and that's especially for we Unitarian Universalists. You see, I think we often see the world as gray. We understand its complexities, and that the truth is sometimes relative. We even pride ourselves in seeing both sides of the story. Now, don't get me wrong, all these things are really good things. The caution here is that it may allow us to stifle our voice. And here's the danger. Without our voice, your voice, a singular story emerges about our world, our country, and our community. A singular story in a society is the loudest story and the dominant story, and defines our perception of the world around us. It most often describes a culture from a place of advantage. Perhaps you've heard it this election season. In spin and bits and bytes of shallow disclosure. Perhaps you read it online or watch it on TV shows. It shapes our popular scene. Consider for a moment what that singular story currently says about our American culture. It says that as individuals, we have equal access to an affluent life no matter what our life circumstances are. It says that people are poor because of character flaws, that individuals have been denied their civil rights because of who they love, that women need to be controlled and their bodies legislated. It tells us that to be concerned about the environment is foolish and collaboration with other countries is a weak stance. It is a singular story that demonizes the poor, it marginalizes women, the disabled, and the elderly. It tells us we are worthy only when we are on our own, and that interdependence is a flaw. Have you heard it? Move away from the political scene and arena, and the singular story of our culture tells us that the more we acquire, the better people we become. It tells us that shopping on Sunday is a better option than going to church or serving the needs of others. And it tells us that fulfilling our life with consumables will make us feel worthy and contented. Any singular story told about a culture separates the haves from the have-nots. It promotes the agenda that elevates the values of the loudest and the most privileged voice. And we are vulnerable to its message because without debate, it is pervasive and insidious. A singular story about any culture or community focuses on the negative. It creates a fearful and a flattened experience because it prevents complexity. It prevents the possibility of dialogue and collaboration between people. It inhibits our connection as humans living on this earth. So perhaps you have a counterpoint to the singular story. Perhaps you even tried to speak it in the fray of public discussion, or perhaps you have shut down and ultimately chosen silence because you've been discouraged by the hateful tone of the story. In any case, I'm here today to encourage us to try again. I stand here and say to all of us, omission and silence is not an option here. See, our silence endorses the singular story. By not speaking from our authentic voice, we imply passivity and tacit acceptance of the shallow ideology that informs the dialogue of our world. In this country, the language and the voice belongs to the people. We accept or reject ideology by writing, by thinking and talking about the issues that touch our lives. If we do not speak, if our voice isn't part of the story, we relinquish and perhaps abandon our morals to those in power or to those with monetary influence. In England in 1936, so much was at stake for King George VI, facing the evil of Hitler in Germany. His voice was critical in rewriting the story of that century. One of my favorite scenes in the movie of the King's speech is when his coach asks him to put headphones on, and he blasts loud music into his ears and asks the king to speak, and he speaks flawlessly and big and relevant. You see, I think the music drowned out his self-doubt and his internal critic and allowed his true and authentic voice to come out. See, and that's our call as well, to drown out the self-doubt and find the place in your heart where your authentic voice lives, and then to release that voice from all the restraints that restrict it and begin to tell the story from our perspective, from your perspective. And here's the key. The authentic voice doesn't come from our thoughts or our readings or our ideology. It comes from our heart. It comes from the place where your deepest values meet the needs of the world. So if your heart could speak today with clarity and passion, what would it say? What would it add to the story of the world? Would it say that no child in this country needs to be hungry or homeless, that the elderly cannot die alone and in pain, that no person will be marginalized because of whom they love, and that we are all better when each of us is better, and that our connection to one another and this earth is what matters most? That's what my heart would say. If your heart could speak today with clarity and passion, what would it say? And if you wonder how to find your authentic voice, how to hear it above all others in your head, I ask you to do one thing. Go to the place in your heart that breaks your heart. Stand smack dab in the middle of that place And I guarantee that the next words out of your mouth will be your authentic voice. May it be so, and amen.
Join us for worship service every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. The church is located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Call for information or directions 585-396-1370. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370. To view the latest issue of our newsletter, The Chalice, look at our website, www.uucc.us. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.